Hi, this is Forms of Carrying Business, Chapter 2, Part 2. So in this one, the second part, learning objectives, will be to analyze separate legal entity principles, describe advantages and disadvantages of incorporation, explain the process of incorporation, discuss the funding of a corporation. As you can see, it's all right around corporations. Examine the roles of corporate directors, officers, and shareholders, and distinguish the ways that a corporation can be terminated. So types of business organization, this is a recap. Sole proprietorship, we looked at, an individual carrying on business alone. Partnership, general, limited, and LLP, two or more people carrying on business together for the purpose of making a profit. And corporation, a legal entity separate from the people who own and control it. So let's move on now. And separate legal entity. This is incorporation creates a separate legal entity separated from the people who own shares in it. So an owner owns shares that can be bought and sold. Shareholders can be continually changing while the company itself remains intact. Corporation provides flexibility, and shareholders do not actually own the assets of the business, and corporation is a legal fiction. So let's take a look at that closely. So a separate legal entity, shareholders can buy shares of the corporation, buy assets, and this is separate legal entities. So the shareholders own the shares of the corporation. The corporation, not the shareholders, owns the assets it purchases. So if you do buy shares in a company, you basically own shares of the corporation itself, but do not own anything inside the company. So you can't go there and say, hey, I'm a part owner, I want free this, or I just want to have access to the corporation. You will not be able to do that. Also, SLEs, or separate legal entities, limits liabilities of the shareholders. So the separate legal entity of the corporation provides a convenient method of accumulating capital, the selling of shares, without imposing significant responsibilities on the shareholders. So those shareholders have limited liability. That means that most they can lose if the corporation is liquidated or gone bankrupt is the amount they have invested. So as a general rule, there is no restriction on the free transferability of shares, although for a closely held corporation, there's usually a unanimous shareholders agreement which does restrict transfers of shares. So for a broadly held corporation, shareholders are free to purchase and sell the shares on the open market without affecting the continuation and functioning of the independent corporation. So again, a corporation cannot die like an individual, and because it is separate from the members who make it up, the death of the shareholders will not affect the continuation of the corporation. And since management and members are separate, it is possible to have a professional management group. And the advantages, shareholders have limited liability. Shareholders protected from unexpected corporate obligations, torts committed by employees, failure to properly perform contractual obligations, and also can be restricted. Right? So directors and officers give personal guarantees for loans. Courts lift corporate veil on hold principals liable for companies' obligations. These are advantages. Other advantages when it comes to taxes may be gained through incorporation. Certain advantages at that. Shareholders can leave funds in the corporation and use it as a vehicle of investment to defer taxes. Then succession and transferability. Corporation continues to exist after death of a shareholder. So if you have shares in a company and you die, the company does not. Shares can be transferred also in a will. So the obligations of the participants and the shareholders here, they owe no duty to the company, and they may carry on business in competition, right? You can have shares from different companies that have the similar our competitors, right? Management, though, are elected directors appoint managers and officers. This is a day-to-day operation of the company. And here, of course, the management cannot work for two competitors. Now let's look at certain disadvantages. Right, most expensive way to operate a business. It's very complex and highly regulated. Everybody has an eye into your business. Major changes in corporate structure require certain amendments to the incorporation of the documents, and the position of the minority shareholder is very, very weak. Really, a shareholder, all you do is they think it's for themselves more. It's an investment more than anything. So free transferability of shares may be also restricted. So other incorporated bodies you would find, cities is one, public institutions, universities, crown corporations like Canada Post, and non-profit societies also. There's a non-share capital companies. So funds are raised by selling shares, right? So there's two types of shares. Par value, which means the company places a monetary value on a share at issue and may not reflect the actual value on the market, right? And this is where it does fluctuate the share price up and down. And there's also no par value. Here the value of shares is determined by the market. So common practice is to issue non-par value shares. So funding of incorporations, buy shares, corporation, to lend money. So as you can see, there are shareholders and there are creditors. And in a incorporation, you've got private corporation and you've got public corporation. So an incorporation, really closely held corporation, there's a few shareholders. Shares are not sold openly on the stock market, considered to be a private company, private corporation. And certain companies that have been public have gone to being private, and sometimes they have switched back. So they do have a choice of becoming public or a private owned company. As it says, if you are private, there are not many shareholders that own stock in that company, and really the few that do hold full control on what the company's direction is going to be. So incorporation, really the prospectus, again, public corporation, it's very complex. Again, it's detailed and highly regulated document, right? Every time you buy and sell shares, this is documented, and you have to always, when you do your income taxes, you do have to always register all the information that you have purchased or sold shares. So it is necessary because the government requires that investors have access to reliable information before initial public offering. Now, if you talk about shares, there's really a couple of types of shares, right? Share certificates issued by a corporation are divided into different classes: common shares and preferred shares. So let's take a look at them. So common shares include the right to vote at a shareholders meeting. So if you ever buy shares, you'll see you're going to get, you're certainly going to get an envelope every quarter, or depending on quarter, or every time there's a meeting, you to vote on certain aspects of what is going on. And if there are dividends, not all companies have dividends, means that they pay you some money depending on what profits they have made or how much they have sold. You might get some dividends every month. So certain companies, or every quarter, I should say. So a lot of companies do offer dividends, but there are a lot of big companies that do not offer dividends. And certainly, as we see going this pandemic, there's a lot of companies that had issued dividends, and they pulled them or they stopped them because of all the loss of money during the pandemic. So there is a lot of regulation, but certainly the company has a lot of right to do a lot of things inside with common shares. So also receive property of the corporation on its dissolution. So common shares are issued if there is only one class of shares, common shares. On the other hand, you have preferred shares, usually give the shareholder preference when dividends are declared. So if dividends are not paid, preferred shares may convert to common shares if you have to vote. So yes, this is very complicated in many sense, and we can go over it in class if you like, but shares certainly is part of the company. So restriction on the transfer and sale of shares often imposed where the company is closely held. So this is what we got to do with all corporate companies, so in corporate companies. So shareholder may not have the right to vote here in preferred shares. And if you look at a corporate structure, shareholders elect the board of directors, and board of directors appoint officers. So here, directors of corporations are chosen by the shareholders and have responsibility for the management of the corporation. Directors owe a fiduciary duty to the company, to the corporation, and not to the shareholders. They are required to act in the best interest of the corporation and usually must exhibit the degree of skill that one would normally expect from a reasonably prudent business person. So directors may also be personally liable where insider knowledge has been misused. So if you have a new product coming out, or if you know that you've lost a ton of money and you know that if a close friend of yours has shares in your company, and you do pass on that information to them before this information becomes public, certainly that will go against the rights of the company, and you can be charged criminally, and you will violate certain laws, right? So senior managers are responsible for the ongoing daily operation of the business and have obligations similar to the directors. So promoters are responsible for creating the corporation in the first place, and the responsibility also to those of the directors and managers is to disclose all information and stop from taking advantage of their position at the expense of the shareholders, right? So you hear this often where a lot of people can go to jail if they do that. The shareholders have few responsibilities, but do have access to records kept by the corporation. We do get reports. If you have shares in the company, you will get a report annually, and you will see exactly what has been done. They also have the right to vote at shareholders' meetings and to choose the directors. That's about it. You can't choose a marketing plan or anything else that's got to do with the company that way. And also, shareholders also have the right to relieve from oppression when the powers of the directors are abused at their expense. So directors elected by shareholders, they owe a duty to the company to be careful to exercise the care and diligence and skill of a reasonable, prudent person. In other words, they've got to do their job. They also have a fiduciary duty to the corporation. A fiduciary duty is a legal obligation of one party to act in the best interest of another. So the obligated party is typically a fiduciary, that is someone entrusted with the care of money or property. It's also called an obligation. So shareholders can prevent derivative action against directors on behalf of the company. And directors cannot use insider knowledge to buy shares to their advantage if they know the price is going to go up, or to sell shares if they know the price is going to go down. So directors may be personally liable for unpaid wages, breaches of company employment standards, also unpaid taxes, damage to the environment, and so on. So they have a lot of responsibility when it comes to the company itself. And dissolution of a corporation may be voluntary or involuntary. This is induced internally or externally. So a corporation does not die, but can be brought to an end through dissolution or winding up. In other words, it's going to finish, it's going to end. So this may be done voluntarily or involuntarily as a consequence of court order. Also, if a corporation does not keep its filings up to date with the government or its agent, it can be struck from the register. So there is a process for revival available for corporations that are certainly struck when it comes to this. If we look at cooperatives owned by their members, they use a service or work for the co-op. Certain examples are dairy farmers that really are co-ops more than anything. And then you've got agencies, principal and agent. It's possible to have two or more business providing services to each other. This is created by express or implied contract by estoppel, a parent authority who has that is called estoppel, by ratification, and by gratuitously. Joint venture, not a form of carrying a business, but a temporary relationship between two or more business to complete one or a series of projects. This is really a joint venture, rarely has a name. It's usually have a written agreement that has patents, let's say, or obligations, and many advantages. Business work together and profits of each other or each expertise. But they go on separate ways at the end of the projects. This is called a joint venture. A franchise, almost done here. The right of operating a business using name, product, business methods, and advertise of other businesses. And franchisor and franchisee. And trademark licenses are a component, and fees or percentage of the profit. So many advantages for both, especially for an inexperienced franchisee, right? But also could be disadvantages for an inexperienced franchisee. And McDonald's would be one, and Tim Hortons would be another. So in other words, basically, you use the company's name, you pay a fee for the company's name, and you rent the building, you buy the products, or you sell the products that they want you to sell, and you make a cut where you make a profit of that. And licenses, just to end, the contract confers rights from one party to another, usually when the rights are related to intellectual property, such as patents, copyrights, and trademarks. We're going to look at that later on in the program. And examples are software licenses like Windows, trademark licenses like Disney characters, and also it could be just about anything that's got to do with software or trademarks or patents for that matter. Great, thank you, and that's it for this part of the course.